there seems to be a lot of interest about this cheap 3D printed carbon saddle from AliExpress. People want to know how this actually perform in the real world, particularly compared to a much more expensive these branded items. So this is a Fizik Antares Adaptive saddle versus an AliExpress, which this one is branded Ryet. So I will be taking these two saddles in quite a head-to-head comparison. First look at their construct, the material, and then looking at the real world riding experience. I'll give you the information that you need so that you can determine whether you want to invest money into a much more expensive option or some of these can do the job. So remember, whether you are a seasoned cyclist or professional racer, a set of good saddle can save your bum. So let's get started. Start with the Fizik. Let me do 0 and then pull it out just to the edge. Coming in, let me move closer. The Fizik come to 38.3, and let's do the Ryet accordingly. So just pull it out again, do it to the edge, and that come into 147.62. So note that the shape of Fizik actually flare down a little bit, so just put it side by side here. The Fizik angle is a little bit more aggressive, while the Ryet is more flat and then flare out accordingly. The Ryet has a flatter shape, which increase the contact area accordingly. And now come to the height. Usually height doesn't pose any issue, but if you are already fully extended your seat post, or you're only using the minimum of seat post length or using a dropper seat post, you might want to consider the height of your bike geometry. So let's have a look of the Fizik. We'll try to measure this from the rail to the top, so get a clear measurement, kind of in the middle point. In there, that come to 52.7, and just swap over to do the Ryet and do the same thing. Try to measure the middle point. The middle point come to 49.56 here. So you can see the Ryet is overall a flatter, a shorter saddle compared to the Fizik. Fizik is overall thicker or higher saddle, which I believe a lot of these go to the padding, which we'll go into a little bit more details. Now let's look at the weight. It is obvious that you want your bike component to be as light as possible. However, lightweight usually means using less material in the saddle, which could compromise the durability or integrity of the saddle. So let's have a look of their weight. So put it here, turn on the scale. Let me pop on the Fizik, just the light as hiding out. The Fizik weighted 183 gram, and then swap out to the Ryet. The Ryet weighted 162. Let me move it across a little bit. Yep. So 162 versus 183. So surprisingly, the Ryet saddle actually come out the top. Hey, who would guess? Alright, so pop the scale aside. Let's look at the pedal thickness, which is actually quite important element to impacting the seat comfort in there. So to get a good measurements, I would probably just measure where you probably sit the most, which is this part along the side here. So I'll do that for the Fizik to start with. Let me just extend that out. change it a little bit so that I get a better contact point. Just go in a little bit there. All right, let me lock that in. That come to 12.47, and then let's take a closer look of the Ryet accordingly. It's a little bit difficult to measure because if you look at the shell actually have a little bit of a U shape coming out, so it actually got a little bit more distant in here. So what I'm trying to do is I'll try to go through the structure a little bit. I'm just navigate through the contact material in there, and I feel that now going through the contact material, the mesh area, maybe I'll just pull it out and do a different one. That might be a better contact point. Yeah, that would be a better sort of real more realistic measurement. So we'll just pull it out again. Just let me lock that number in, pull that out slowly so that don't scratch and damage anything. And the Ryet come to 9.27 millimeter deep in terms of the padding. Now let's look at the construction of this saddle. So I'll be looking at all the whole part of the saddle, starting from the rail, then go into the shelf, and then go into the padding material. So let's take a closer look of each of these components. So both of the Fizik and the Ryet have both carbon rail. It appears to be very strong. It should be able to withstand a good amount of force in there. So let's take a measurement of this rail. The Ryet measure 8.94, which is equivalent, is a 9 millimeter configuration. And the Fizik, let me go in, come into 9.86, which is equivalent to a 10 millimeter construction. They're both quite common. It is actually important to know when I put those two saddle out back to back. The usable rail length for the Fizik is slightly longer. So if I measure that now, just give me a sec, that come to 62.58. And then if I do the same thing for the Ryet there, and that come into, hang on, just give me one sec, 51.31, right? So the usable rail length, what does it impact is if you already using a saddle that actually quite pushing forth or back, using the quite a limit of what the manufacturer recommended, you might want to consider having a saddle that have a longer rail length adjustment to give you the saddle the forth and after, just to make sure you don't buy a saddle and then you find out your your bike geometry completely out of whack, right? So before we move on to the shell, one mention that I should mention, the Ryet have really good attention to details, that they put a coating, a very nice coating on the rail itself. It make it quite a grippy rail compared to the Fizik. The Fizik is completely smooth, and it is, as a result, it actually quite slippy when you climb on to the seat post clamp. I end up using quite a bit of carbon paste to stop it moving back and forth, which I don't have to use any carbon paste when I install the Ryet saddle, which is a nice bonus, nice plus. So now let's look at the shell material and the shape of the shell. The purpose of the shell is to provide a solid foundation of the entire saddle and to reinforce the rail. The saddle shell should help to ensure the saddle remains sturdy and provide good support during the ride. It also influenced the shape of the entire saddle. That pretty much determined the shape and then the curve of the saddle. So Ryet saddle is made out of carbon, which is lighter, despite the fact that I could not just simply just take off the padding and improve it. The rail is bonded to the shell, so it is carbon bonding. It appeared to be quite strong. I couldn't find any weakness there, so if I squeeze it, it actually feels quite solid, no matter how I apply different force to it, which is quite a nice one. The shape of this saddle is somewhat like a Pro Style series, but with a smaller cutout. This is definitely smaller cutout compared to other saddle that I used. It featured quite a wide back end and quite a fat nose compared to the Fizik, right? So on the other end, the Fizik is not pure carbon. It's a carbon reinforced nylon structure, which added a little bit of weight. So as you see before, the Fizik saddle is just a tip more heavier than the Ryet, but that's not too much of an issue. And what I find is, because this is not a full carbon, it actually provides a good degree of flex in here. If I just give a bit of squeeze in here, you can see that the shell is flexing, and compared to the Ryet doesn't really move that much because of the carbon construction. The carbon is a lot harder, right? The Fizik saddle is actually follow a really well received Antares series. Also the saddle offer a very different design compared to the Ryet. This is a lot longer, not narrower. This is where you design to be seated, and this is where you design to be seated. So the positioning where your Fizik saddle and the positioning of the Ryet saddle is quite different. This one, I feel the Fizik more focused on flexibility, and it's more a traditional design. It's still got a really decent, nice cutout, and the Ryet, the shielding, the shape provide a pretty flatter structure. It's probably more easier, I would say, for more people, because you got a wider sort of sitting area before the wings start wearing out. Okay. So ultimately, the saddle shell is quite an important component, and it has a significant impact on the overall fit and the weight of the saddle. It is important to choose a saddle shell material and a design to meet your bone structure. That is the most important stuff. Actually, the material itself is probably not that important. However, the shape itself, which is define the saddle shape, is more important than anything. Now let's move on to the cover material, and this is why we buy these 3D printed saddle in the first place, right? The printed layer promises to deliver a high level of comfort and support for rider of many different body types, and it's proven by many bikefitters these 3D printed saddle is likely to fit most rider. My bikefitter told me that he never has to recommend a client to replace a saddle should a bike is already fitted with any of the 3D printed saddle. So let's talk about the feeling, right? My first impression of this Ryet saddle was really good, despite the covering material was quite firm. I believe over the time, like the Fizik, this material will become softer over time. And when I first sat on it, I was very impressed by the comfort level straight out of it. But however, when I noticed quite a big difference when I look into this saddle in a little bit more details. So if I can get the camera to get closer, just maybe change the angle a little bit. Might be a little bit hard to see in here. Yeah, that's got a better angle. So you can see the layer, not just the top layer, but the underneath layer of this saddle are quite uniform. What does it mean is overall, if I zoom it out now, so the entire construct of the Ryet saddle are on the same thickness and the same level of support throughout the entire saddle. Now let's look at the Fizik in comparison. So again, I'll zoom in a little bit. So maybe a little bit difficult to see, but you probably I can tell you when I press on this different area of the saddle, particularly in here, this is a bit more firmer. And when I look into the underneath layer of this construct, they are not uniform. They are of different shape. So when I first look at it, I was like, wow, that's really messy. But when I actually sat on the saddle, I now know why they do it. What they have done is they based on the thickness and the shape of the material, they created a different zoning of the cushioning. So on the closer to where they expect you to sit, like here, is definitely more a firmer structure. When it close to the edge, is actually quite a lot softer, right? So I think this is quite a missed opportunity for the Ryet if they got this 3D printed structure material, but they don't use it to the full extent to create different zoning. The overall is very uniform, but it's just doesn't really translate to what they can achieve in the saddle, which is a little bit of disappointment in there, right? I see this difference in design and manufacturing process that highlight the contrast between a cheap and an expensive saddle. While the 3D printed technology can be easily copied, the detail and the design that goes into creating a progressive transition of the saddle, which set the Fizik saddle just apart from its competition. Before I get changed, if you find this video helpful, please hit the like button and help others to find this on YouTube. Saddle comfort is such a subjective topic, and I have tried a different saddle and finally settled on a saddle that have a cutout or a pressure relief channel, which is something like Stella Italia. This Fizik has a channel relief, and as well as this Ryet. So you really need to find what is suitable and what you feel comfortable with. So to give you some context, I'm 80k on and off. I ride mostly on the tarmac, but the roads in here where I do sometimes it could be a little bit bumpy. I wouldn't say it's anywhere close to gravel, but there is a lot of bumps on the road. So finding a comfortable seat is important for me as well. So let's talk about the Fizik to start with. Fizik really is the best saddle that I ever have. I ever owned myself. It's really good shape, and the material is great. This is kind of my benchmark saddle, so that's 10 out of 10. Just the pricing of it is quite expensive though. Can't floor of it. So when I go through bumps, it do quite flex quite a lot, so give you a fair bit of comfort. So if you don't like the saddle to flex, that might not be a good saddle for you. But for me, provide a good level of comfort on the different body position, either on the hood, on the drop, or even just simply rest my both hand on the handlebar to sort of do a ride up straight. That feels really well. And then let's look at the much cheaper content, the Ryet, and this how it stack up between these two. Obviously they are not the same product and not even close when you look closer to it. Ryet got a really good construction, so it feels really firm when you ride on it. The padding of the Ryet is somewhat a little bit thinner than the Fizik. It do provide good level of comfort, but not as much as dampening compared to the Fizik one. But I do find one major problem for me related to the Ryet, because the nose of the Ryet is a bit more wider compared to the Fizik. So when I do pedal, just a standard pedal, I'm not even sort of doing anything hard, I feel a fair bit of rubbing on the saddle nose, and I don't have it with the Fizik. And another thing that I want to point out is the padding, how well it covers the shell. The Ryet doesn't cover it really well, so to the edge, particularly when I go through bumps, you can actually feel the edge of the shell quite a bit. Not something that enough to cause discomfort, but to be honest, that's quite annoying. And I guess the shape that it take off is not particularly designed just for the 3D saddle. It's probably more designed for a traditional pedal saddle. So with a traditional material, you have a way less sort of compression, I would say. So you never have that problem with the shape of this Ryet. But when you come to the 3D printed material, it really comes into the problem with itself. So that's my final verdict of this. So if I need to think about it again, would I actually pay money to buy it again, knowing it this is almost $99? To be honest, I will probably go with a traditional pedal saddle that I know it fit well with me, not to just try to find something that really cheap that pretend to be good product. It is good itself, but it's not at the same level that what it could achieve. If you have one of these saddles, let me know what you think, and if you're planning to buying it, you might have a different opinion, but I feel that a similar pricing but a good quality traditional pedal saddle might be a better option. Alright, that's me. I'm out. Happy cycling.